Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Rabbi, I'm taking some friends to Nashville today, so I'm going to probably check out about 15 minutes early, but I'll catch the rest of it on YouTube.
All good, all good.
Hey,
I
Caitlin.
yeah, I don't know how many people we're gonna get online because of Nashville starting at 11. So we'll see who's gonna watch on YouTube during, after. So it just may be a smaller crew. But we'll still
Quality, not quantity.
absolutely, and we'll press forward. So it's all good. Um So good to see those who are there. And listen, I know that for those in Knoxville, Nashville is a draw. And I know it's happening from 11 till 2 uh, at the JCC. If you're able to go, I suggest that you do, even for a bit of time. It's a great program. I got to be there last year and certainly enjoyed it. So again, all good. Happy to do this with however many people we have here, and we'll go from there. So, we're going to continue today with discussions of principles and values. When I was looking at what we would do next week, I realized that we haven't really had too many discussions about Judaica and Judaica items. I don't think we've really had a class focused on that. So I think I'd like to do that. Just, stuff in the Jewish home. And we can have, sort of a discussion about, what all that's about and what you would use it for. Um, and I can get into that more next week. So I think that's what I'm going to talk about next week. I also recognize the next Sunday is Mother's Day, which is not it's not a Jewish holiday, but I recognize it is a big deal. So, for those who want to, for those who have other plans, obviously, we'll continue to have this online and, recorded and all that good stuff. So happy to have you for whenever. So, okay, so going on with matters of values. Um, there are six that I'm going to try to cover today. I assume we'll get through all of it, but we'll see potentially. Um, the first one we've talked about a little bit, and I think it's just something that it's worth reminding everybody, and that's the idea of pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means essentially saving a life, and the idea that you can set aside almost any other mitzvah, almost any other commandment, in order to preserve one's own life. Now, that is not absolute, meaning um, there are, notably, according to the rabbis, three main exceptions to the idea of pikuach nefesh. Or at least where you have to where pikuach nefesh is not the more important value. Those three exceptions are if someone says, if you don't uh, that I will kill you unless you commit idolatry, right? You are supposed to accept death rather than that. You are supposed to accept death rather than be compelled to uh, engage in immoral sexual activity. And you are supposed to accept death rather than being compelled to kill somebody else. Those are,
Rabbi,
yeah.
what about like in Spain, what if you are um, said you either convert to Christianity or we're going to kill you?
So I think for a lot of people that would fall under the idolatry commandments.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to equate Christianity with idolatry. It's just that um uh, and so now, with that said, there is a long history of Jews converting to Christianity, but sort of doing it with their fingers crossed behind their backs,
Hmm.
where they'll do it, but then they'll observe Jewish rules in secret. There is a history of that. Um, God forbid we should ever live in a time that in which are forced to make that decision again. My feeling is it's not for me to judge what.
Right.
And I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying like it's not for us to judge like what we would do in that particular circumstance
Hmm.
because uh but yeah, but I mean there is a history of of doing so, and um where essentially we basically pretend to take any vows toward Christianity seriously, or another religion
Hmm.
Going to be an
seriously.
interesting class that I've read about, but I'm sure not in near the detail you probably know, is how they practice Judaism in secret,
Yeah.
doing all those kind of things. And how
Hmm.
did that change? I mean, from maybe when they started to when they didn't have to do it anymore. Did like they have to relearn to be Jewish again, or what?
Fair point. I mean, so there is, and this sort of jumps ahead to some of the Jewish history that we'll talk about, which is fine. There's this whole category that you may have heard of called Marranos. Marranos were Jews who lived during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which no one expected. Sorry, Monty Python joke. But the they lived during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and what happened was and during that time, it's like convert or die, and they said, okay, we'll convert, and um, indeed, found ways to observe at least bits and pieces of Judaism in secret. There is a and there's been sort of a fascinating um, there are a lot of fascinating stories over the ensuing centuries of people who realized that they had Jewish heritage centuries later. And then, I mean, one of the stories that always stuck with me was this person saying, it's this, we've had this weird family tradition for hundreds of years where every late Friday afternoon, the mothers of the family would go inside of a closet, a dark closet, and light candles. And only later on do they realize that came from Maranos lighting Shabbat candles in secret. They didn't make that connection, which is okay. But they hadn't made that connection because like that, but they were Christians. So there are some fascinating examples of that. Um, it,
Rabbi,
yeah.
Greg, Greg Kaplan is a Jewish university professor at UT who
Mhm.
has studied uh, a lot of the Marrano culture in Portugal and Spain. So,
Mhm.
if you ever run into Greg Kaplan and want to know more about that, he can go on at length.
Okay. No, good to know. And hey, I mean, maybe there'll be an opportunity for him to talk about that. It's something we do, so that's great. Um, Regarding Pikuach Nefesh in general, I mean, one of the ways where that really comes into play is on Shabbat. Um, and I remember hearing a story of somebody who was, strictly Shomer Shabbat, but also a doctor who had to be on call on Shabbat. Just it was his turn to be on call. And the story was that, he had, I mean, I think these were the days before everybody had cell phones, but they had like a beeper, right? So he had a beeper on him, and all right, then it's like if the beeper went off, it's like I have to use the phone. I have to, right? And everybody understands that, or ought to. But the example I was told of something of ways not to do this was that this doctor um, he would, call the phone, find out, okay, there's an emergency at the hospital. He has to go. He'd get in his car, go to the hospital, and then walk up 10 flights of stairs rather than taking the elevator because he was still trying to keep Shabbat in some ways. And and I remember like the person telling me the story is that patient could have died in that time. It's like, in other words, like if you're going to, if you're going to take Pikuach Nefesh seriously, you just you do it,
Mm-hmm.
and so in other words, like it's no time to be half baked about it. Just you do what you have to do at that point. So, and it is, and it is an important, and it's an important principle because, and sometimes it extends to, questions of potential sickness. And goodness knows we referred to it a lot. I know I did during discussions a few years ago during the worst of COVID-19, when we had to make adjustments in our ritual behaviors, and the way we ran services, certainly, because of the need to um, limit risk. One of the things that and people met some of those decisions we made with a certain amount of resistance. Now, part of it had to do with the unfortunate fact that, there were doubters about whether how seriously to take COVID-19 and all that, which is, part of the whole political sociological problems we have in the world now. But one of the decisions we had to make, and we were following the advice of doctors, was high holiday services that first year, that in the fall of 2020. We actually brought in a film crew into the sanctuary. We had a minyan. We did have a minyan in the room, but certain parts of the Amidah we didn't do. Certain parts of, I mean, like, because the idea was we are going to, like, it's like we have to do this in 2.5 hours max, was what the doctors told us. You have to cut some things. You have to. And it's like, and there were people like, well, why aren't we doing X? Why aren't we doing Y? Because we have to go. you know, we have to do this. In a different circumstance, I remember my mother telling me a story when she and her husband lived in South Florida, and there was a major hurricane threat. This was, I think, in 2005. Um, I forget whether it was like, so I forget the name of the hurricane. It all run together, um, but it was Yom Kippur Day, and uh, like they went to services, but it was like we are going to shorten this as much as possible because like we have to get out of here so we can shelter safely from the storm. And so one of the things they did is they took out the Torah, but they didn't walk around with the Torah. They basically took out the Torah and just, put it straight on the table to read. And there were a handful of people who said, "What? Why don't we get to walk around with the Torah?" And the rabbi said, "We're having a hurricane."
Well, maybe it was just me, but it seemed like back during the COVID thing, we didn't have the Zoom option, did we? Or just maybe it was me that didn't have it.
Mhm.
So many synagogues were, adapting to it at that, like where COVID-19 was the impetus to bring in live streaming, to bring in Zoom capabilities. I mean, I think for a lot of places that was, I mean, there were some synagogues doing it before COVID, but then a bunch said, "Oh, we have to do something, whether it's live stream, which is one way, or Zoom, or YouTube, what I mean, combinations thereof." They had to start doing that, or they felt the need to do that, and I'm glad they did. Um, by the way, for Orthodox synagogues, where the decision was to not suspend the use of, the prohibition against electronics on Shabbat, who didn't feel that it was a compelling one, and no judgments. Um, that became, a major problem. I mean, or that impacted a lot of things, or some of them had tried to have services outside if the weather was okay. I mean, like, look, it was a lot of challenging decisions had to be made. And I truly believe that, uh, even though the decisions may have varied depending on the needs of the community, I really do feel that pretty much everyone was doing the best they could. And it's not like there's an absolute playbook on how to do pikuach nefesh. I will tell you one relatively familiar story about it, and then maybe we'll move on to the next thing. There is a story of a small Jewish village in Eastern Europe, as many of our Jewish stories are. And the story is that there was a famine, right? And people were literally, there were serious
Mhm.
illnesses and, due to hunger. And then it was Yom Kippur. And the rabbi was getting tired of everyone saying, "Oh my gosh, it's like, all right, now we have to fast." It's like the rabbi's like, "We have to eat.
Mhm.
Like, we are starving. We have to eat when we can't." And so what he did was he, in the middle of services on Yom Kippur, he made kiddush and made motzi. He like had, he had wine, and he had bread in the middle of Yom Kippur service, and made the blessing in front of everybody. And people were like, "Rabbi."
Mhm.
And he said, and somebody said, "I didn't realize you were so lenient on fasting on Yom Kippur." And he said, "I'm not. I'm very strict on pikuach nefesh."
Mhm.
And so, you know, I think that puts it as well as anybody, or as well as I could, certainly. Okay, so Lashon Hara.
Ooh.
Okay, Lashon Hara.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there's an expression, not a nice expression. Um, the first word in the word Lashon is Lamed. The first word in Hara is Hey. So the phrase is, Lashon Hara Lamed Hey, tell it to me anyway. Or, a little more obnoxious, Lashon Hora, Lamed Hey, go to hell the easy way. Okay. What is Lashon Hara if you're not sure? Lashon Hara means evil speech. It means it's gossip, but it's not just gossip. I mean, it's negative speech. Now, there is a story in the Talmud that says, or like a question is asked of rabbis on the wedding day, do you praise the appearance of the bride regardless of their appearance? I realize this is not that this is a not a really nice thing. I mean, so I would say bride or groom, right? Like in other words, if the bride and groom don't look good on their wedding days, do you still say, "Oh, you look beautiful, you look handsome"?
Of course.
Okay, okay. That is the answer that they reach. But there was an argument, to the opposite, and that's the thing. The Talmud often includes opinions that are then rejected. So one of the rabbis actually suggested, no, you should describe them as they are, and that was then rejected, and which I believe is the right decision. But um, this was sort of like a test case in the question of Lashon Hara. The idea is to not say negative things whenever possible. It's really hard to do. The comparison that Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, I know not a lot of you have read some Joseph Telushkin. The explanation that he gives is, if you couldn't go 48 hours without alcohol, like if you were like, I cannot do this, but like I can't go this amount of time without alcohol, you have an alcohol dependency. So what do we call people who can't go 48 hours without saying negative speech? What do we call that? And what I would say is, if you're like, oh, I can do that, try. It's really hard. Now, is it an absolute? No, it is not an absolute. Like there is some sort of, gray attached to it, right? For instance, if your friend is thinking of um, uh, giving business to somebody who is not trustworthy, you are supposed to give your friend some sort of warning. But of course, be careful on how you do it. The best statement I ever heard about Lashon Hara, honestly, was not even a Jewish statement. Like, I mean, I don't even remember where I heard this, but I don't think it was from a rabbinic source. But that there are three questions you have to ask yourself before you say something. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me right now? It's obviously difficult to go through those three questions before we open our mouths every time. It's hard to do that. What it means is that we all could use, and I include myself in this, we all could use to be more deliberate and intentional about what we say. So it goes beyond simply, not saying mean things. It's also trying to figure out, can we use our words to be forthright without being unnecessarily hurtful? It is a very challenging sometimes, but still an important, very important principle. Questions or comments at this moment? Okay.
I have something. Oh,
Go ahead.
in the scheme of, life importance, it's probably not that important, but it just happened recently. A friend of mine went on a 2-week tour last year with a tour company, had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience in Europe. And a friend of hers went on the same tour about a year later. They had different tour guides through the same company, and the experiences were completely different.
Mhm.
The second tour guide was just not there, really not present. And so you have a group of people spending a lot of time, a lot of money, and at this point, maybe some level of risk going on international travel. And and that person didn't want to write a negative evaluation about that tour guide or even give any kind of feedback, which I don't know, that's a real predicament to me because of what's involved with other people spending time and money doing this. You know.
Well, so agreed, and I think and when you talk about, especially when if you're talking about like feedback that goes on the internet, right? I mean, good and goodness knows we all could use some, I mean, our society in general needs work on that, to put it mildly. But you know, it's a question of, when you make comments, or I mean, what kind of comments are you making? And how are you making it, right? You can, there are, forums, obviously, where there can be spirited and productive back and forth without getting into personal insults, without getting into unnecessarily harsh rhetoric. And very few people seem to have a sense, or it feels like, maybe I shouldn't say that very few people know how to do that. I mean, that probably is that may be a little much, but I think that when there are those who don't do that, it sticks out. I think that's fair to say.
Rabbi, wouldn't you also, if let's say you're a witness under oath, you're compelled to tell the truth, which may be negative.
Right. And I think that's one of those times where, yeah, I mean, testimony is a different story, Now, but I think also, going back to this idea of being deliberate and intentional,
Mhm.
right? When and if you need to make testimony or something like that, it's like, okay, you can do that without um uh defamation, or you can do that without making,
Judgment.
yeah, snide remarks, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
If you can say, to say, you can say, um, under oath, okay, this person stole from me. Uh, you can say that without going into, rather than saying this person stole from me and he's ugly too,
Hmm.
or whatever it is, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you know what I'm saying, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Hmm.
there's no,
Hmm.
it's like, stick to what is actually relevant
Hmm. Hmm.
when it comes to that.
I was just gonna say if that old expression, if you can't say anything nice, and don't say it at all.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is it's a good place to start, right? I mean, is it an absolute? Not in absolutely every circumstance, but is it a good place to start? Is it a good way to kind of like say, then I think from there you go into those questions, right? Does something need to be said by me right now, right? And there are times where, if the answer to all three might be yes. And okay, there are circumstances where it happens, but if the answer to any of that is no, you can avoid some pain, some unnecessary pain. Okay.
It seems like if a bride, you're kind of expected to say, you look lovely, because she may look the best day of her life and probably does. So you can probably say it, how pretty she is and that. But unless nowadays it seems like unless it's a female relative, you can't say stuff like that. You just can't.
Well,
You just
look.
can't say it anymore.
So listen. I mean, like, one thing I can say is that, like, all right, if it's a bride or a groom, if you don't care for the style or whatever it is, then why are then there's no need to be critical in that case. But if, like, the person, looks nice, but there's like a big smudge that can be wiped away, it's like, let's take care of that, or whatever. Like, there are ways to, there are ways to gently say, let me help you with that, without making the person feel, for person feel terrible. So,
Rabbi,
okay, yeah.
you're not supposed to say it. What if you just listen to it?
The
There's
I you no
like
no
the
good. Oh, that's a very good question.
like the
Yeah.
Lamed Hay thing. There's an expression. If you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by me.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that. Yeah. Um, uh, One is supposed to steer clear if possible, right? In other words, if you feel now, sometimes, sometimes it's you don't necessarily know what people are going to say, so you can't, there's no way to prevent ever hearing it. But you can sometimes feel that if you are in a circumstance where, like, you're in a conversation and you can tell that it's going in a certain direction, you can say, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with this line of conversation. I think there are ways to do that. Or to say, or if it's a little hard to do that, just to maybe excuse yourself, just to say, hey. So, I might, so yeah, so I would look at that. Yeah. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm not, by the way, I'm not trying to unnecessarily race away from this topic. I just want to, catch what I can. Hachnasat orchim. Hachnasat orchim is welcoming guests. This is a principle from which there is a very vivid example in the book of Genesis, where you have Abraham who sees the three strangers walking in his vicinity, and he drops everything to welcome them, to be hospitable to them. Part of what makes it so impressive is that this passage in the Bible takes place immediately after the passage noting his circumcision. And the way that the rabbis explain it is that he was recovering from his circumcision, and yet he cared enough about welcoming guests that he set aside his discomfort, his physical discomfort, in order to do so. The other thing that is important about that passage, the lesson that I think is really, really neat, is that he said, "Oh," he says to the strangers, "Oh, well, I'll give you a morsel of food. Let me give you a morsel of food, a little something, basically." But then what does he do? He asks Sarah, well, he doesn't really ask, but he asks Sarah, make cakes, basically like bake bread, for the and then he himself, Abraham, goes and finds a goat, and and kills the goat and cooks it, like basically like cooks fresh meat, right? Which is a lot more than just a little morsel that he promised. And the statement is that a tzaddik, a a righteous person, will promise you a little and give a lot. The opposite of a tzaddik, whatever word you want to use for that, will promise everything and give you nothing. So the idea that whenever possible, we are to welcome people into our homes. We are to, especially people who might not have another place to go. It's especially prevalent for Passover. I mean, the Passover Seder, I think, is the ultimate time where we really push this, that where it is important to say, you don't have a place to go, let's make sure you have a place to go. And I do think that also, like that, I mean, so in some ways, this is this is one case where I would say this is also a universalist idea. This idea, and plenty of cultures have beautiful customs of welcoming guests into their home. I mean, there are. I don't want to make it seem like inviting guests into our home is only a Jewish thing. It certainly goes beyond. But it is. But we are no exception to that.
Well, kind of backing up what you were saying, that's the first time I hadn't read it, and the first time I'd heard it. If you're saying that Abraham was circumcised as an adult, I had the privilege of having, a mole do just get a drop of blood,
Yeah.
Which wasn't really that painful, in case anybody's planning on is planning on converting. But the idea of a full circumcision as an adult, because my children were circumcised when they were like about maybe 4 and 5, and I don't know you know that probably might know him, but Mitch Goldman is a surgeon, a surgeon, retired surgeon at UT. He did it, and the rabbi was there doing the religious stuff, and I was thinking, oh, that was must have been really fun for them. Fortunately, I just got the drop of blood, but that's like it started that way. The first circumcision was as an adult.
So, it's interesting. So growing up in Denver, um, I entered high school in the early 1990s at a time when there were um, hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of Jews um, that had been allowed to leave the former Soviet Union in order to live in freedom. And some of you might remember. I mean, like there were many Jewish communities that absorbed, these former Soviet Jews who, some of them, because of all the restrictions of religious observance in the Soviet Union, never had a chance to be, fully engaged in religious life. And one of the young men who joined my class at my school, this is a Jewish day school, um, he said, he never had a bris. And he said, I feel like it's important to be circumcised. And um, he, so he was out of school for a couple of weeks. I mean, because, circumcising, an adult or, close to it is, that's a major procedure. Um, and I remember there were a couple of guys making um, uncouth jokes about that person. And one of our teachers overheard it, and he's like, "You stop that right now. What he did was amazing. I'd like to see you in a certain similar circumstance deal with that." Right. Um, and he was, yeah, the teacher was right, I think. And so, um, yeah. So it is a major procedure if one is, I mean, period. It's a major procedure, but it's certainly, there's a reason why, the bris happens when the boy is, in first days of life in an ideal world.
I know my sons suffered with it a whole lot longer than I did. I mean, their English it was not good at all, or barely had English at the time.
Mhm.
But they were pretty miserable for a while.
Sure. No, it's a major thing. There's no
The
question.
drop is no big deal in case anybody's planning on having it done. Hopefully, my hope is that's all you need.
Absolutely. No, and it is something that when, I meet with potential converts, I make sure to, male converts, I make sure to mention. So, okay. Shalom Bayit. Shalom Bayit literally means peace in the home. Again, this is an idea that isn't just limited to Jewish practice. But there is a famous set of passages in the Talmud of what we have to do mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of the path to peace. In other words, where sometimes we have to make compromises based on avoiding bitter conflict. We have talked numerous times about sometimes we have values in conflict. And it can be challenging. And I feel like this is especially relevant sometimes for people who are considering converting, and when uh, there may be family members who are either not supportive or supportive, but maybe puzzled at some of the things that the Jewish life involves. Um, the question that comes from time to time: What do you mean? What do you mean that you're not going to celebrate Christmas with us? Right? Um, And by the way, it's not just a Jewish, non-Jewish thing, right? Sometimes Jews of different observance levels, like, let's say, because, just drawing on my own experience, um, I am, I would say my observance level is stricter in some ways than other members of my family. The idea of, and my family has gotten used to for a long time, the idea of, well, okay, it's, what are you, all right, are you comfortable doing X on Shabbat? Are you comfortable doing Y on Shabbat? If there are visits, there's like working around Shabbat is an important, is important to me. And therefore it's like, okay, well, let's see what we need to do. But there are other times where, um, where I have to consider certain accommodations because to walk in to a situation and say, I'm doing all these things and you need to change around me. It's not, uh, you know, are there families where they'll say, hey, no problem? There could be, but maybe not always. And this isn't to say that, okay, in order to mollify other people's feelings, you have to just bend to their will. That's not what we're saying. But, and it really is sort of like a case by case basis. Um, one thing I remember when I was married, um, my in-laws at the time, um, they don't keep kosher. When I would stay in their home, they made a point of getting kosher meat. They made a point of not including dairy products when they would make the meat. Were they using the same pots and pans that they normally use and the same plates and silverware? They were. Was I really going to demand that they, make more changes to their kitchen? I decided not to. Are there circumstances where someone would say, well, I'm just not, like, I'm not going to eat in your house, or I'm going to bring all my own food? Um, there are cases where that happens. And I'm not trying to judge whether that's right or wrong, because you have to know the people involved. And I think that's really what this is about. You got to know the people.
Mhm.
You have to understand who you're dealing with, and know that respect works both ways. Um, you know, uh, and also I would say that, like, okay, and I think you have to look at it, in just every little detail, because you can, uh, there are ways that we need to be accepting of others, but we are also deserving of acceptance as well. Um, so it's a conversation in many ways.
Well, I'm going to share this with it's more detail than what you're saying. I'm going to share this with you, Rabbi, and also with the group, because I don't care who knows. When I came back from Germany after I don't really like to say converted. Feel like I joined the tribe. I didn't convert, but anyway, that's another issue. Uh, my mother was the only one that either was really concerned about it or the only one really said much of anything. And she was saying, well, if you don't believe in Jesus, you won't go to heaven. Well, after I go to heaven, you won't come in. I said, oh, yeah, I'll be there. You can be over your little group with the Christians, and I'll be over here with the Jews, and we can wave. And that kind of stopped her. And then she helped raise our two children, two sons who were Jewish, and she knew we were going to synagogue and they were going to religious school, and it never came up again.
And I'm glad that I'm very glad to hear that you had that experience, right? I mean, there are and I'm always very thankful, to hear that you have, when people are in families where there's a sense of acceptance and respect. Um, and for when that isn't taking place, my heart goes out. But um, I think, I think that we always need to think creatively about how do we reach some sort of satisfactory, arrangement where people can feel that, okay, I'm not compromising too much of my observance, and I'm also taking time to show respect and love. I may have mentioned this example, before, when we were talking about Shabbat. Um, a good friend of mine told me this story about how, like, he had just begun observing Shabbat strictly maybe a couple years before. And these were in the days where you had, if you remember, answering machines, where it's like when they were leaving the message, you could hear it, on the machine. If you were in the room, you could hear it as it's being recorded. And so his friend called on a Saturday morning, and so it's like, hi, and it's like, the message begins, hi, it's, this friend. Um, Look, I know you can't pick up the phone right now. It's okay. But I just want to let you know my grandfather just died. And my friend said, I picked up the phone. Does that mean that that is absolutely the right decision in every in every circumstance? Not necessarily. I'm not saying that, like, oh, that's the line that we have to make sure that we cross or don't cross. I'm just saying that as an example of, like, somebody trying to say, like, um, that when we deal with different people, and many times we discover that our families can be pretty different than us. When we deal with different people, um, uh, there is a Jewish value, right? It's not just that it's a nice thing to do, or like it is a Jewish value to do certain things for the sake of creating peace. And this goes beyond, I would say, pikuach nefesh, right? Pikuach nefesh is, there's a life-saving thing, right? Um, I don't know if this one particularly applies. There's a story told in 1993. So if you remember the Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman, who was an observant Jew, and was, he was the vice presidential nomination for the Democratic Party in 2000. He's an observant Jew. He will, but one of the things he would do is he would make certain exceptions when it was really important to the job. And during, some moments of political gamesmanship, there was a point where there was like this major budget battle, and it was, coming down to the wire, and like Lieberman's side needed every vote that they had. The debate was going on, and one of his Republican colleagues goes up to him and says, "Hey, Joe, it's Friday afternoon. It's getting close to sundown. You're going to have to go, don't you?" And he said, "Nice try. My rabbi said I can stick around and make an important vote if I have to." And he did. Now, again, I don't know whether that's mipnei darchei shalom. I don't know whether that's for the sake of, doing peace or doing important work, whatever category that falls in. There is, I don't want to make it seem like Jewish law can just be set aside for any kind of convenience. What I'm saying is, we love our tradition, and we have people we love. Sometimes those things don't line up perfectly. And the idea is, and there's no one way, there's no one like methodology to use in terms of, should I do this, should I do that? There's no formula to apply. You do what you can. You do what you can, and again, you have to know the personalities involved, right? And just being able to come together, to have honest discussions, to being willing to think creatively. I think that's, that's all a part of Shalom Bait. I think that's a good place, not only time-wise, but I think emotion-wise, to end our discussion. Again, if you are in Knoxville, I encourage you to stop by Nashville at the Jewish Community Center anytime between now and 2 p.m. I do have a couple more Jewish values to talk about next week, but then after that, we'll talk about Judaica and stuff to have around the house. I think that's going to be a fun one to explore. And I hope you have a lovely and wonderful day wherever you are.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.